different topic, but from clinical point of view as well as from academic point of view, uveitis is usually a long question for you. So we'll just deal with this in a little more detail. Coming to the description of uvea, uvea is the highly vascular structure of the eyeball. There are three components in the uvea. One is the iris, the next one is ciliary body, and the last one is choroid, going from anterior to posterior. So first anteriorly you will see the iris, next you will see the ciliary body, and next choroid. Iris metabolism of anterior segment is mainly the function of iris. Ciliary body, as we all know by now, we have dealt in detail with the topic of glaucoma. Ciliary body is the structure from where aqueous secretion or the aqueous production starts. These are all the important parts of the uvea. For revision sake, this is a cornea which continues backward as sclera, and here is your uveal tissue. Anterior most part is the iris, the middle part is the ciliary body, and the last part continuing till the back, that is the middle coat of the eyeball in the back, is the choroid. Now, how do we classify uveitis? There is one particular nomenclature that is important. This is called as SUN nomenclature, that is standardization of uveitis nomenclature. This is how uveitis has to be divided. So as we know, there are three structures. The same way, the division includes anterior uveitis, intermediate uveitis, and posterior uveitis. So the anterior uveitis includes the involvement of the iris, anterior part of the ciliary body. Intermediate uveitis involves the posterior part of the ciliary body up to the pars plana, and posterior uveitis involves the entire choroid. So when you have anterior uveitis along with intermediate and posterior uveitis, that is the entire uveal tissue is involved, then you will call it as panuveitis. Each of them is further divided depending on which part of the uvea is involved. So as we know, anterior uveitis involves up to the anterior part of the ciliary body. So when the iris is involved, it is called as iritis. But some inflammation will also be there in the ciliary body. That is anterior cyclitis. When both of them are together, you call it as iridocyclitis. This component is what we see most commonly clinically. So this is how the patient presents to you, that is with iridocyclitis. Now, intermediate uveitis is when posterior part of the ciliary body is involved, that is the posterior cyclitis, or when the pars plana region is involved, then it is called as pars planitis. When the anterior vitreous body or the hyaline tissue is involved, it is called as hyalitis. Some amount of inflammation will be spread to the surrounding retina and choroid, then it is called as basal. It is not the advanced type, but it is a basal retinochoroiditis. These are all parts of intermediate uveitis. Talking about posterior uveitis, the main structure in the posterior uvea is the choroid. We will see further how the choroid can be involved. It can be focal, that is, there can be one focus of infection, or it could be multifocal, or it could be a diffuse involvement of choroid. So choroiditis is the most common presentation in posterior uvea. Some amount of inflammation of the retinal tissue overlying the choroid will also be affected, then it is chorioretinitis. When the component is more of retina, then it is called as retinochoroiditis. Neurouveitis is when the neural layers are involved. Panuveitis, as we have discussed, when you have anterior, intermediate, and posterior uveitis, all of them together, then it is panuveitis. So how do you classify uveitis further? That was the anatomical consideration. Now clinically, how do you classify uveitis? As in any other case of medicine, acute infection, so the same way the acute uveitis will be, which is of less than 3 weeks of duration. Chronic uveitis, which is persistent for more than 3 weeks, is called as chronic uveitis. Recurrent uveitis is when the patient gets multiple episodes of uveitis, then it is called as recurrent uveitis. Now, based on pathology, you classify it as granulomatous or non-granulomatous. So when the basic component of uveitis is a granulomatous reaction, then you call it as granulomatous uveitis. Whereas if the reaction is non-granulomatous, then you call it as non-granulomatous uveitis. So what is the meaning of granulomatous uveitis? As we discussed, there is a granulomatous reaction. So when does it occur? Usually a granulomatous uveitis occurs when the eye is invaded by a living organism. You'll have an organism responsible, like in tuberculosis, the mycobacterium is involved, or in syphilis, you have treponema involving. These are the part or leprosy where you can see Mycobacterium leprae is attacking. So when these living organisms will cause some reaction in the eye, then it will form a granulomatous type of reaction causing granulomatous uveitis. So basically it is not the infection, but it is a autoimmune component. Because of autoimmune type 4 hypersensitivity reaction, you see a granulomatous type of reaction developing in the eye. Most of the times, these reactions will be insidious. Most of the cases of granulomatous uveitis will be chronically present in the eye and will be slowly progressing. You don't see an acute attack of granulomatous uveitis. Usually, it will be for a chronic longer period and will be very insidious in onset. Whereas non-granulomatous uveitis, if you see, it can present as acute as well as chronic. Acute is anything which is less than 3 weeks of duration, whereas chronic is anything which is more than 3 weeks of duration. So acute uveitis, most of the times it is idiopathic. That is, there you might not be able to detect a cause of uveitis. Or sometimes when there is an infectious component due to mumps, influenza, measles, or any other infection, or if there is involvement of HLA-B27. Most of the times HLA typing is important because few patients who have a certain HLA typing are most commonly affected. In case of HLA-B27 associated uveitis, which is commonly seen in ankylosing spondylitis or Reuters, is present. Behçet's disease, here you have HLA typing of B51 type, which is most commonly involved. You also have other arthritis like psoriatic arthritis. This also has a inflammatory component, and other autoimmune diseases like inflammatory bowel disease, lens-induced uveitis, UGH syndrome, and any cause of reaction in the eye, either due to a corneal graft rejection or anterior segment ischemia or trauma, or any involvement of the ciliary body because of the trauma, or a condition called as glaucomatocyclitic crisis. We'll talk about this later. So these are the things which can happen in a case of acute uveitis. So most of the times acute uveitis is idiopathic, but there are also the causes of uveitis that you have to look for. And HLA typing is very important. You see HLA-B27 associated uveitis in ankylosing spondylitis shows HLA-B51. And chronic uveitis. Non-granulomatous chronic type of reaction is seen, especially in children. If you see in children, you have to suspect juvenile chronic arthritis. This is commonly seen in girls of less than 12 years of age. They suffer severe arthritis. At the same time, there is a chronic reaction or non-granulomatous uveitis in the eye. There is another entity called as chronic iridocyclitis of children, where the child might not be having an associated arthritis. Another varied component of this is Fuchs heterochromic iridocyclitis. This is something which you see in the adults, not in children. About this, we'll talk in the next class. Now, these are the other causes as I've shown you for non-inflammatory acute non-granulomatous uveitis. Now, coming to granulomatous uveitis, as I told you, acute presentation is very rare. It is usually insidious in onset and becomes chronic. And we see most of the times an organism is involved, like herpes, that is herpes simplex, herpes zoster, or in syphilis, that is syphilis, you're having Treponema pallidum, leprosy, tuberculosis, or brucellosis. One exception here is you can see sarcoidosis. Sarcoidosis doesn't have any organism, but still it has a tendency of creating a pathologically granulomatous reaction anywhere in the body. The same thing happens in the eye. So sarcoidosis is one reason wherein without a living organism, you can see a granulomatous uveitis. Phacoanaphylactic uveitis is a separate entity as such. It happens when there is a reaction to the lens protein. Lens proteins are usually enclosed within the capsule of the lens, and they are separate from the immunological system. So due to trauma or rupture of the anterior capsule, whenever the lens particles leak, they might cause a type of phacoanaphylactic uveitis, which will be granulomatous, where you can see a large mutton fat capillaries. This also we will discuss. So coming to the clinical features, how does a patient present to you in a case of, basically we'll talk about iridocyclitis. So the patient will come to you with mainly pain. Pain is the feature. All the other things will be next. First, the patient comes to you with acute pain. Pain in the sense the patient will have pain in the eye along with some amount of headache and dragging type of pain, which sometimes doesn't let the patient sleep. So he definitely comes to you, and there is redness in the eye, And photophobia is very important. The patient will not be able to tolerate the light specifically. So that he complains to you of pain and photophobia. Along with that, you will also see lacrimation, and definitely vision will be affected. Now, we'll start looking at the signs one by one, because all the signs in a case of uveitis are very important. So first, starting with the lids. The lids will be swollen, edematous lids. Because of the edema of the lids, the eye appears small in size, that is blepharospasm is there. That's why you see the palpebral fissure height is decreased, and this is blepharospasm. And you see something called as circumcorneal congestion. Circumcorneal congestion means all the vessels around the limbus, 360 degrees around the limbus, you see this type of congestion, wherein ciliary congestion is also there and conjunctival congestion is also there, because both the vessels are involved in case of iridocyclitis, because the ciliary body is involved and the iris is involved. So this type of circumcorneal congestion, what we call as CCC, is predominantly seen in the case of iridocyclitis. Now, what are keratic precipitates? You see a typical finding in a case of iridocyclitis, which you do not see any other in any other condition in the eye. These are called as keratic precipitates. These are white dot-like structures. Here, if you can see, there are multiple white dot-like structures. These are actually stuck onto the endothelium. So these are nothing but inflammatory cells. These white dots are also a collection of inflammatory cells which get stuck to the corneal endothelium. So here, this is a slit lamp photograph. What you're seeing is diffusely you can see the eyeball, you can see the cornea, and here this parallelopiped light, what you're seeing, this is the corneal slit. One slit is anterior, the other slit is posterior. When you see the posterior slit in particular, you'll see round white dot-like structures attached to the corneal endothelium called as keratic precipitates, or we call them as KPs. So these are collection of inflammatory cells. From where does the inflammation occur? It is the blood vessels which will bring the inflammatory cells into the eye. So these inflammatory cells could be lymphocytes or monocytes, and these are attached to the corneal endothelium. When the endothelium of the cornea gets edematous, when the cornea gets a little bit of edema, the adhesions between the endothelial cells will be disturbed. So these will go and attach into the area wherein there is a boundary of the two endothelial cells. It will not attach on a single endothelial cells, but between the attachment of two different endothelial cells. That's why you see a little amount of gap between the keratic precipitates. So depending on the type of keratic precipitates, we can come to a opinion of the type of uveitis the patient is having. And there's one particular term used here called as Arl's triangle. In the eye, the aqueous, is occupying the anterior chamber. It is constantly moving. So due to the convection currents in the eye, you can see the keratic precipitates will be settled inferiorly. This is the effect of convection currents as well as gravity. So this inferior part of the anterior chamber, wherein the keratic precipitates are arranged in a pattern maximum area, is called as the Arl's triangle, where you are supposed to look for the KPs. So now we'll look at a type of keratic precipitates. Mutton fat KPs means very large, round, which are fatty in composition. They look like fats. So that's why we call them as mutton fat KPs. These are very greasy. These are characteristically seen in granulomatous type of uveitis. Whenever the patient is having a granulomatous reaction, you see mutton fat type of KPs. Now sometimes we see very small KPs, which are fine dot-like KPs. Depending on their configuration, if they are small KPs but they are sharp white, then it could be a case of non-granulomatous type of uveitis. Sometimes if there is also a hemorrhage along with uveitis, then you see the KPs are colored as red. If there are old KPs, if it is a chronic reaction and the KPs have been present for a very long time, over time they get pigmented. That we call it as pigmented KPs. And crenated. Crenated means the margins are not characteristically clear, sharp boundaries. If the boundaries become disturbed, then you call it as crenated margins. That indicates that the KPs are old. So, mutton fat KPs indicate granulomatous uveitis. Small KPs with sharp white borders indicate it is a non-granulomatous reaction. Red KPs indicates there is also hemorrhage along with uveitis. The presence of pigmented and crenated KPs indicates that the reaction has been present for quite a long time. Now here you can see there are multiple KPs. You can see here they are dot-like structures, round structures, multiple KPs in this particular eye. Here you are seeing white KPs and they are having a characteristic sharp boundaries. So this is a case of acute uveitis. Here multiple dots are seen and this is a case of granulomatous uveitis. We'll see furthermore. See now here you are able to see the granulomatous KPs very clearly. Look at the large size of each KP. So each keratic precipitate is large and round and greasy. This is called as mutton fat KP. You have to remember this. Mutton fat KPs are seen in granulomatous uveitis. And here you are seeing pigmented KPs. You are seeing the brown pigment in these KPs, which will indicate that they have been present for quite a long time. Now, coming to the other clinical signs. We have few terms in case of anterior uveitis wherein you are seeing aqueous cells and aqueous flare. What is the meaning of cells? Cells means, as we have discussed, the dilated vessels within the iris, they bring a lot of, whenever there is reaction. Normally, if you see the blood aqueous barrier, it does not let any leakage of the components of the blood into the aqueous chamber. But whenever there is inflammation of the eye, like in the case of this iridocyclitis, what you're seeing, if there is inflammation, then these blood vessels, they get leaky. So when they are leaking, they leak these cells. Whatever inflammatory cells are there, like the neutrophils or the monocytes or the lymphocytes, they are leaking into the aqueous chamber. Along with that, some amount of plasma is also leaking. So when the cell components are seen, then you call it as the cells. We grade among the uveitis depending upon the number of cells that we can see. Flare means a turbid reaction. Normally, as you all know, that the aqueous is totally transparent. So you do not see anything in the aqueous, in the anterior chamber. You see a very clear anterior chamber. But if there is some turbidity or the transparency of the aqueous chamber is lost because of some plasma, then you call it as flare. We'll see how we grade cells and flare next. Hypopyon. Hypopyon, as you all know by now, is the settlement of pus in the anterior chamber. Pus in this reaction will be sterile. And here, when the cells that is which are present in the anterior chamber, they are dense, they get settled down and form a hypopyon. Here you can see the cells are settled down, and this 1 mm hypopyon you can see in this particular eye. And you can see how hazy the cornea is. You're not able to make out the iris details very clearly. So this is how the hypopyon is formed. Now this is what, and these are all slit lamp photographs. You are seeing a big slit here, which is covering from the superior part of the cornea to inferior part of the cornea. This is how we are looking at this eye. And even at this eye, the slit is complete. We are seeing up to the inferior part of the cornea in the limbus. Then we are able to appreciate the hypopyon. Here you can see the examiner has used a small slit, very narrow slit, which is giving you only this particular size of the slit. So why we use this particular size of the slit is when you want to look at the cells, how many cells are there, then you have to decrease the size of the slit. Size of the slit is almost 1 centimeter from there. So you have to decrease it to almost 0.3 or 5, and then you have to count how many cells are there in this particular eye. This is nothing but like how you see the sunlight. If the sunlight is entering the room through the window, you see number of particles moving in the sunlight, like the Tyndall effect. The same thing will happen with the cells and flare. So if you are able to see cells separately, then you have to count the cells. So along with the hypopyon, sometimes if there is hemorrhage, hyphema can also be present within the eye. What you have to note in particular, the findings of anterior chamber are most important. Secondary to KPs. First thing you see in a case of iridocyclitis is the KPs. Second thing you see is the contents of the anterior chamber. First, we have discussed about cells, flare. If there is density of the cells is more, they'll settle down as a hypopyon. If there is any hemorrhage, then you'll see hyphema. All these things will cause, for over a chronic period of time, will cause a change in the depth of the AC, shape of the AC, and how the angle anatomy has changed. We'll discuss this later on. Now, we will look at the grading. Here I have shown you the grading of flare as well as cells. Both the gradings are divided into 0, +1, +2, +3, and +4. Cells is a number. As we have discussed, you have to put a narrow slit beam, and then in that particular beam, how many cells you are able to make out, that is what is called as the grading of the cells. If you're not making out any cells, good, then that is 0. 5 to 10 cells in that particular slit will give you a +1 grading. 10 to 20 will give you a +2 grading. 20 to 50 cells in that particular slit will give you a +3 grading. And anywhere more than 50 cells in the aqueous will give you a grading of +4. Now, the same thing we'll look for flare. Flare, as I told you, will be the transparency of the aqueous. If you are able to see everything. There is no flare. Absent flare, then it is zero. If mild flare is there, that is a faint flare is there, that a little details of the cornea are becoming hazy, then it is +1. But because of the presence of flare, if you're not able to appreciate the iris and lens details clear, then it is +2. If the flare is marked so that you're not at all able to make out the details as of the cornea of the iris and lens, then it is +3. Now the last grading is +4 when you see a fibrinous exudate in the aqueous. If the aqueous is having a fibrinous exudate, it is +4. Here also cells you call it as +4 when there are more than 50 cells. If so many cells are there, invariably the patient will have a hypopion. All the cells, most of it will settle down inferiorly in the anterior chamber, and then you will see a hypopion. So this is a classic picture where you're seeing circumcorneal congestion, cornea is hazy, and you're seeing a hypopion. Now we'll talk about the iris signs. As you know, it is an inflammation of the iris, so there will be swelling of the iris. So because of the swelling or exudate from the iris contains the blood vessels. So whenever the blood vessels are exudating the liquid, then there is a swelling of the iris and it becomes waterlogged. So the pattern of the iris is lost. Normally the iris has a pattern. Like in the center, in the pupillary area, you'll see frills. You will see small crypts near the center. Then you will see collarette-like pattern, and in the end, you'll see peripheral crypts. But when there is a waterlogged, all this pattern which is nicely present in our eyes is lost, and then you call it as a muddy iris, which doesn't have any pattern. A presence of chronic iridocyclitis will cause a chronic insult to the iris, so that the color of the iris changes. So supposing these are two eyes of the same patient, one eye will be darker in color compared to the other eye, then you call it as heterochromia. Though that is not a picture of heterochromia, I'm just giving you an example. So a long-standing case of iridocyclitis will give a picture of heterochromia. Heterochromia means hetero is different, chromia is color. So the color of both the iris, that is the iris of both eyes, is different in a case of long-standing iridocyclitis. Now another characteristic feature of iridocyclitis is presence of nodules in the iris. But this particular feature is seen only in granulomatous uveitis. As we have discussed, in granulomatous uveitis, the patient will have a tendency to form granulomas. So those granulomas are formed in the iris. That will be seen in the shape of nodules. There are two types of nodules. One is called as Koeppe nodules. The other one is called as Busaka nodules. We'll see these. This is the iris. Here you are seeing the pupillary frill and you are seeing a little bit of collarette pattern. But what you are seeing here is the presence of a whitish elevated round structure. This is a nodule. It is called as Busaka nodule. Here you are seeing small raised nodules in the pupillary margin. These are called as Koeppe nodules. So you have to remember this. Koeppe nodules are always towards the pupillary margin and these are small in size, whereas the Busaka nodules are always in the periphery and these are larger in size. But these features, both the nodules, are seen only in cases of granulomatous uveitis. The most common cause of granulomatous uveitis is sarcoidosis. In our country, we see tuberculosis most commonly. Now, other iris signs. So, you are getting to see a lot of iris signs you don't see in any other condition. So, we'll discuss these signs also because these are important. Posterior synechia. Synechia basically means addition. Now, the meaning of posterior is the synechia is anything, additions will start from the iris. Posterior synechia means addition between the iris and posterior to the iris you have the lens. So, that is the anterior capsule of the iris. So, if you see the attachment between the iris posterior surface and anterior capsule of the lens, then you call it a synechia. Depending on how long the uveitis has been present in the eye, the synechia varies. Initially, you might see just one or two synechia, one here, one in the periphery, somewhere you can see. But over a period of time, different types of synechia are seen. Sometimes segmental. Segmental is like you're seeing on only one particular segment or only in one particular quadrant. This type of segmental synechia can be present. Sometimes you have annular synechia. Annular means only the tip of the iris, that is the pupillary margin of the iris, is attached to the anterior lens capsule. Total posterior synechia means the entire surface, that is from the periphery of the limbus to the center of the iris. The entire surface of the iris is plastered to the anterior lens capsule, then you call it as total posterior synechia. Here you can see multiple synechia are formed. This is your pupil, and you can see how many adhesions are there here along with the lens capsule. So these are multiple synechia. And here, because you're seeing only the pupillary margin, probably these are annular synechia. But if even this part of the iris is attached, then you call it as total posterior synechia. How do you know that? We'll just see. Now, here we are showing, sometimes you are not able to appreciate the synechia when the pupil is smaller in size. But when you dilate the pupil of that particular eye, if there is an adhesion, the pupil will assume a festoon shape. This is called as festoon shape. You're not seeing a normal circular pupil, but because of the presence of synechia, an irregularly round pupil is seen, that you call it as festoon shaped pupil. Over a long period of time, due to these chronic insults to the iris, not only the structure of the iris is lost, along with synechia, there can be secondary neovascularization of the iris. That is, multiple new vessels will arise on the iris. So whenever new vessels develop, be it in the iris or in the angle or in the retina, these will be very fragile. So they do not have the elastic components which are present in the normal blood vessels. So they are particularly prone to trauma. Whenever these new vessels are prone to trauma, traumatized, then there will be bleeding. So the presence of blood in the anterior chamber will tell you that probably there is some neovascularization of the iris. That you have to look with higher magnification. So now coming to the pupillary signs, we have discussed iris in detail. Now we'll look at the signs of the pupil. So first thing is, what is happening is all this is inflammation of the iris. So whenever the iris is inflamed, there are two muscles in the iris. One is the constrictor pupillae and the other one is dilator pupillae. So because of the inflammation, there will be disturbance and the constrictor pupillae will react and you will get constricted pupils. You will see small size pupils in a case of iridocyclosis because of irritation of the iris. So the constrictor pupillae does its action and the pupil gets constricted. So when you are trying to elicit the light reflex, you'll see because of the presence of the synechia, you see that the pupil is only sluggishly reacting to light. It is not able to react completely. And when you're doing a mydriatic test, as I've shown you here, you are seeing a festoon pupil. You're not seeing a very good circular pupil, but alteration in the curvature here because of the presence of synechia, that you call it as, what I have mentioned here is festoon pupil. Now, there's one entity called as ectropion of the uveal pigment. What will happen is because of the presence of synechia, normally the uvea contains two layers. The outer layer is a pigmented, inner layer is what you see on the surface is the non-pigmented layer. On the inner surface, you see a pigmented layer. So because of the fibrosis and the synechia, the posterior pigmented layer gets pulled anteriorly. That's why you see a dark color iris which is seen in one part of the eye. That is called as the ectropion of the uvea. So these are patches of pigment on the anterior surface of iris due to the contraction of exudates. Now, we have seen the synechia. Annular synechia are only when the margins of the pupil, that is the margins of the iris, are attached to the lens surface. Then you call it as annular synechia. If they are present throughout, they will cause complete closure of the pupil. That is, as we all know that the aqueous is produced in the ciliary body, which is present in the posterior chamber. It has to travel through the pupil into the anterior chamber. But if you see all around 360 degrees annular synechia, this aqueous will not be able to come forward. That is, you are closing, the pupil is closed or it is secluded. Then you call it as seclusio pupillae. That is, the whole pupillary margin is tied to the lens. Because of this, a lot of aqueous gets accumulated in the posterior chamber. So this starts pushing the iris forward. The iris will assume, the normal iris is in a flat configuration. But if there is a lot of fluid accumulated in the posterior chamber, it keeps pushing from behind. So the iris becomes convex in shape. This convex shaped iris is called as iris bombing. Another thing that can happen is occlusio pupillae. So because of the blocked pupil, what is going to happen is you will see iris bombing. As we have discussed, the iris will be bowing forward because of the pressure from the posterior chamber. And then you will also see that whatever exudates are there, they'll cause total posterior synechia. Initially, only the margin of the iris is attached, the pupillary margin is attached to the anterior lens capsule. Later on, the entire surface of the iris gets adhered. Then in that scenario, you might see the anterior chamber is deeper in the center than the periphery. So that is what is called as occlusio pupillae. Now, what is plastic iridocyclitis? These are all the changes which can happen one by one in a case of uveitis. Probably in the initially, when the patient comes to you, there are only the few iris signs, or the patient might be having only the KPs initially. In the next phase, you are seeing the patient has cells and flare. As the inflammation is going out of control or it is going increasing progressively, then the patient might develop synechia, which might lead to the development of an annular or ring synechia and seclusia pupillae. Or when the entire exudates become organized, then they'll cause something called as plastic iridocyclitis, wherein all the exudates get organized behind the lens and into the vitreous. Sometimes even behind the lens, you are seeing a cyclitic membrane that is called as pseudoglide. What is the ultimate sequelae of this? Whenever the inflammation keeps on progressing, it is, as you see there, it is causing damage to the iris. Along with damage to the iris, you will also see damage to the ciliary body. So whenever there is a damage to the ciliary body, first thing is the ciliary body, initially probably it might produce more of aqueous, but there comes a stage wherein it cannot produce aqueous anymore. That is called a ciliary body shutdown. So when that stage reaches, when there is a ciliary body shutdown, so the entire intraocular pressure of the eye, which is supposed to be somewhere in the range of 10 to 20, will come down rapidly. So the patient's eyeball is not able to maintain the pressure, then it becomes small and it shrinks. Then you call it as phthisis bulbi. This is a specific term which is used when the eyeball loses its tone because of the IOP which is decreased when the ciliary body is damaged. This happens only due to ciliary body damage. No other condition causes phthisis bulbi. So this is what you have to remember. The shape of the eyeball is lost, but all the components, that is all your muscles and the shape of the anterior chamber, everything is there. It is still there, but then you call it as phthisis bulbi. Now, as a sequelae, multiple complications can occur. We'll see the complications what can happen in the case of uveitis. Because of long-standing inflammation, you know the lens derives its nourishment from the anterior chamber. So when all these changes are happening in the anterior chamber, the nourishment of the lens is compromised. So whenever the nourishment of the lens is compromised, it turns opaque or it forms a cataract. So then it is called as a complicated cataract. It is a complication of some other condition. Now we'll just see again about ocular tension. I've told you, we'll just see again. So the presence of seclusio pupillae, that is only when the pupillary margin is attached, it causes the formation of iris bombay. So what is happening in iris bombay? The center part is still attached, whereas the peripheral part is free. So what is happening is the AC assumes a funnel shape wherein there is a posterior bowing of the iris. So the iris, so posteriorly is pushing the iris forward. Only the center part of the iris, which is attached to the lens capsule, shows a deep AC. The rest will show a shallow AC. So the AC will become funnel shaped. We have seen that it causes changes in the shape of the AC. So here you are seeing the AC becomes funnel shaped, wherein it is deep in the center and shallow in the periphery. So these are the sequelae of raised tension or because of the seclusio pupillae, which is causing iris bombay. Ultimately, what does it cause? So when the AC is becoming shallow in the periphery, shallow in the sense the iris is going forwards, shallow in the sense what? The iris is going forward more towards the cornea, isn't it? So when there is a long-term distance is decreased between the cornea and the iris, they become very close. So over there, the synechia can form. So these are anterior synechia. That is when the iris is attached to the cornea, then it is anterior synechia. When the iris is attached to the lens, it is posterior synechia. Now, because of these sequelae, what has happened is iris has taken a lot of time and just gone closer to the cornea, leading to the formation of PAS. PAS means peripheral, because these synechia can be found only in the periphery. Peripheral anterior synechia. This is again the cause of angle closure glaucoma. So in the initial stages, you can see the formation of seclusio pupillae followed by iris bombay. Here the pressure will be raised, and if at all peripheral anterior synechia develop, further the pressure will raise because of the development of angle closure glaucoma. So it is an inflammatory type of glaucoma. Sometimes the presence of exudates or cells in the anterior chamber, they will block the trabecular meshwork. So in that particular scenario, you will see the patient develops a secondary open angle glaucoma. So a patient of iridocyclitis is prone for both angle closure glaucoma as well as open angle glaucoma. Open angle glaucoma by virtue of the presence of the cells which block the trabecular meshwork. Some amount of trabeculitis component is also there. The trabecular meshwork is inflamed. The pores are not open exactly. So that will give rise to an open angle glaucoma. When the angle is closed due to peripheral anterior synechiae, it might lead to angle closure glaucoma. And as we have discussed, long term, because of the presence of these glaucoma, the ciliary body undergoes shutdown, leading to the formation of a cyclical, we call this hysis bulbi. About the pupil now. Now let us see the signs of the lens. Now, the presence of posterior synechiae, the iris pigment gets attached. I think somebody has to switch off their mic. There's a disturbance here. Because of the presence of inflammation in the eye, you can see the presence of few changes in the lens. One is we have discussed cataract, that is a complicated cataract. Another thing is pigment dispersion on the anterior capsule of the lens. Here you can see in iridocyclitis, the iris becomes waterlogged, the pigment is released. So whatever pigment is released, it can get deposited on the anterior capsule of the lens. So you see pigment dispersal on the anterior capsule of the lens. And because of the disturbance of the lens nutrition, the patient might develop cataract. The cataract here is called as complicated cataract, and there are two specific terms we use for the complicated cataract here. One is called as polychromatic luster. Polychromatic is multiple colors. The cataract will not be just white, but you can see a particular characteristic color changes in the lens along with a breadcrumb appearance. That is dot-like multiple breadcrumb appearances are seen. This is very typical of a complicated cataract called as polychromatic luster and breadcrumb appearance. Now we have seen in detail what is granulomatous uveitis, what is non-granulomatous uveitis. Just to brief out about all these things, we'll just look at granulomatous uveitis as a gist. So what will you see in a case of granulomatous uveitis? So the KPs will be large and greasy mutton fat KPs. Then there will be dense posterior synechiae and you are seeing nodules. Nodules will be seen. If they are at the pupillary margin, you call them as Koeppes nodules, and if they are in the periphery, then you call them as Busaka nodules. So ultimately, there is a dense nodular infiltration in the granulomatous uveitis. Now, in a non-granulomatous uveitis, it is usually an allergic type of reaction. This is chronic, this is acute. Here you are seeing the KPs will be fine and few. Here you are seeing large and greasy KPs, but here the KPs will be very fine. And the duration is usually short. The extent is diffuse, but there will be no focal lesions. You are seeing flare more commonly in non-granulomatous uveitis. So the importance here is the differential diagnosis. We need to differentiate it from two things. One is acute conjunctivitis, where you see a congestion. Here also you see a diffuse red eye. We have seen circumcorneal congestion in case of iridocyclitis. That is one differentiating feature. How do you differentiate conjunctivitis from iridocyclitis? Can anybody please respond? How do we differentiate conjunctivitis? What are the features of clinical features of conjunctivitis? Can anybody please tell me? So shall I call a roll number? Can roll number 20 please tell me what do you see in a case of conjunctivitis? What do you see in a case of conjunctivitis? Conjunctivitis, the conjunctiva is inflamed. So you see a conjunctival discharge. Along with redness, the main characteristic feature in a case of conjunctivitis will be discharge from the eyes. So the patient complains to you of discharge from the eyes, which sticks to the eyelashes. These are the typical things you see in a case of conjunctivitis. Whereas the congestion will be mostly in the palpebral area and will be a diffuse congestion. Whereas in a case of iridocyclitis, you will see a circumcorneal congestion. Now, acute congestive glaucoma. How do you differentiate acute congestive glaucoma from this? The intraocular pressure will be invariably raised and the AC will be shallow in the case of acute congestive glaucoma. Coming to chronic iridocyclitis. Chronic iridocyclitis, as we have discussed, is a chronic disease wherein the patient will have decreased vision. The signs are few, but the patient will have severe Loss of vision. This is a case of chronic iridocyclitis. Here we can see long-standing chronic uveitis causes. One is the loss of architecture of the iris. Second is the presence of multiple synechiae within the eye. And wherever these synechiae are attached, they will cause uh, blockage of flow of factories from the posterior chamber into the anterior chamber, leading to iris bombay and peripheral anterior synechiae. Ultimately, this area will be entirely closed, forming a seclusio pupillae, or the next stage will be occlusio pupillae. And there will also be a cataract called as complicated cataract. Now, the next thing is, now we've discussed the disease in detail. Now we'll look at the investigations part. So, how do you investigate and when do you investigate? So there are certain indications when we investigate for the patient. We don't investigate each and every case. Supposing the patient has come to you for the first time, this is a single attack and only one eye is involved, and it is only anterior uveitis, no posterior uveitis, and there are no specific features, then you need not investigate the patient. So whenever it is a non-granulomatous uveitis, you have to look whether it is the first attack, whether it is a unilateral anterior uveitis without any specific features, then you need not investigate, just treat the patient. But if the patient has granulomatous uveitis, then you have to, yeah. Rasika Reddy, are you Rasika?